Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's Movie Blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we're going to be talking about X-Men Dark Phoenix, the film that comes out this week, which is likely going to be one of the lowest grossing X-Men films of all time and possibly one of the lowest rated if we are to believe what's going on with all the behind the scenes chaos. For those that have not been following the story, it has been said that they had to reshoot the ending of this film, meaning over the past few months, meaning very last minute, because apparently, especially with the acquisition of Fox by Disney, it had a lot of similarities to the ending of another Marvel film known as Captain Marvel, which I think is hilarious that Captain Marvel not only could potentially be the destruction of the entirety of the MCU, but also could be the destruction of really what might be the last real X-Men film we'll have for a while. Remember that when Kevin Feige came out and said we have a 5-year plan and X-Men is not a part of it, which means that we're not going to get an X-Men film at least for the next 5 years, which I think is both a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because if they're taking 5 years so that way they can reboot and restart, then obviously I think that it could potentially be a good thing, but it could also be a bad thing because that means that the X-Men will be put on ice for 5 years, especially seeing that box office-wise, they have been cooling off tremendously ever since the incredibly well-made and well-received Days of Future Past. They have been going on a downhill slide ever since. The X-Men universe, to me, has just been this series of ups and downs because you had the first X-Men film, which was good, you had X2, which was great, and then you had Last Stand, which sucked, and then in between that you had X-Men Origins, the Wolverine movie, which was just totally god-awful. Finally, they were able to reboot it with First Class, which was fantastic, which led into Days of Future Past, which was just amazing, and then it led into Apocalypse, which was very underwhelming and was not very good, and now it seems into yet another disappointing film in Dark Phoenix. I'm going to be trying to see Dark Phoenix opening night, though, of course, as you guys know, I'm currently in a show, and so rehearsals are going to make it hard for me to see the first showing of this film, but I do intend to see this film either Thursday or Friday at some point, so that way I can get you guys back the information that you need on it. But it is really sad because X-Men seemed to be going in a good direction, and then Apocalypse kind of went off, and I thought to myself, maybe Fox will be able to get back on track with this film, but ever since the first trailer came out, it just looked cringeworthy, just didn't look very good, and of course, with everything else surrounding it with the Disney deal, doesn't seem like we're going to be getting a good one anytime soon. And so, what are the current box office projections for this film? Well, Disney has come out and said this is what they expect for the box office to make. This is coming, of course, through Bounding Into Comics. One source has provided us with Disney's expectations for X-Men Dark Phoenix's domestic box office haul on opening weekend and also for its entire run in theaters when it comes to the domestic market. One source from Disney expects the latest X-Men film, Dark Phoenix, from director Simon Kinberg, to bring in $45 million on opening weekend, and Disney expects the film to make $100 million in its entire domestic box office run. That is quite abysmal. Just keep in mind, just as frame of reference, that the Avengers Endgame is already upwards in the $800 million just domestically alone here. This is set to be capping out around $100 million, which overall is not very good, especially in comparison to a lot of the other films in its run when you adjust for inflation. The opening weekend expectation is in line with what Box Office Pro has predicted that the film would bring back in April. They indicated that the film would have an opening weekend between $40 and $55 million. A $45 million opening weekend would be a series low for the X-Men franchise. The worst opening weekend in X-Men franchise was The Wolverine, which I personally enjoyed, but of course, because it came out between certain films and also was a very different type of film, it makes sense that the film did not really grab the attention of many audiences, though I would say it's often on on sale for Blu-ray. It's usually available for about $5. I think now you can even go to a place like Big Lots and get it even cheaper than that. If you can, I would recommend getting it because I actually think until the very end, when it becomes kind of a CGI mess, it is a pretty good Wolverine story. And of course, you got Hugh Jackman giving it his all, which only brought in $53.1 million for its opening. Deadpool had the highest opening weekend with $132.4, and X-Men The Last Stand, which has also loosely adapted the Dark Phoenix saga, had an opening weekend of $102.7. So this would be half of The Last Stand, which is often considered to be one of the worst X-Men films ever to be made. A $100 million total domestic gross would also be abysmal for the franchise. Wolverine grossed $132.5 million domestically, released back in 2013. The series' current king is Deadpool, which grossed $363 million. The best performing X-Men team film was also X-Men The Last Stand. It grossed $234.3 million, and the reason why, even though the film was awful, is because X2 was great. It was the end of that trilogy, and so, of course, many people went out to go out of their way to see it opening weekend, and, of course, once they realized how bad it wasn't very long before that eventually dropped off. Our source previously indicated the film would be 1 hour 53 minutes long. However, they had provided us with new information which indicates the runtime will only be 114 minutes. I think they meant 140 minutes long, but it could be 114. It's possible the film went through some heavy editing over the past month. There were rumblings in May that a file from Fox China indicated the runtime for the film was 110 minutes, meaning this film got a huge cut job, which would make sense and would coincide with the fact they did reshoots to try and change the ending. And if you know anything about a film, if you create a film and you change the ending, you mean that you've now built your entire film, you've now edited your entire film to lead to a certain conclusion, and now because Disney has taken over, you have to change that ending to correspond away from and not be the same as another film in the franchise Captain Marvel, which means that now you might have a different ending, but the way you got there is still mostly going to be intact, I suggest, which means that this film seems like it's going to be a giant mess. It's possible that there might be two separate cuts. I would say there is absolutely two separate cuts because they had an original ending and then that it changed the ending because of all these other things. So here's the official description of the film. The story is one of X-Men's most beloved characters, Jean Grey, as she evolves into the iconic Dark Phoenix. During a lifetime-threatening rescue mission in space, Jean is hit with cosmic force that transforms her into the most powerful mutants of all. Wrestling with this increasingly unstable power, as well as her own personal demons, Jean spirals out of control, tearing the X-Men family apart. Of course, we've already got a little bit of this in the original movie, in the original trilogy that we got. However, they didn't really go into it as much with the deep space interacting with energy, etc. It was more of something that inside of her that was being held from the very beginning. So it took a little bit of a different approach in the original trilogy, but of course this one seems to be taking it in a little bit of a different way. The film sees the return of James McAvoy as Charles Xavier, etc., and it is of course coming out June 7th with early shows starting at 7 p.m. So what does this all mean for this, for the X-Men franchise? I think that this is honestly, especially with these low expectations coming from a source from Disney. Now, of course, this is from Bounding Into Comics, but I do trust those guys over there with a lot of really useful information. It seems also to be something that coincides with what many other experts in the field have said is likely going to be what the film overall makes. This is a really sad ending to the X-Men universe, especially, again, we have 5 years, potentially, between this and the next X-Men film. That's 5 years in which these actors are going to grow up. These are 5 years in which the actors are going to possibly move on to other projects, which means we could lose the likes of James McAvoy as being Professor Xavier, which has been, to me, one of the greatest castings of all time. Michael Fassbender's Magneto has also been fantastic. Nicholas Hoult as Beast has been fantastic. All of these people, all of these really great actors that they've gotten to play the younger versions of some of these characters have been absolutely solid, and it's going to be really sad that Disney taking over, making them change the ending, all for the sake of saving Captain Marvel, whatever the hell other film that they could possibly be talking about, really doesn't make any sense as to being any other film other than Captain Marvel, really just does frustrate me a lot because I was really hoping that they could end the last of the Fox movies. Of course, this is not the official last ending of the Fox films because that was Alita. Alita was the last one fully under Fox's control. This one has been under the control of Disney now for at least a few months, which explains why they were able to do the ending and change the ending as such. But it is really sad because if you end on a really low note, if you end on one of the worst, or what could potentially be not only one of the worst X-Men films, but also one of the lowest grossing X-Men films, to me, it just seems to indicate that Disney does not care about the X-Men universe nearly as much as I think it should be. If they want to know where their money could and should be, it should be on X-Men. Yes, we can talk about the MCU and how successful it has been and how close it is to beating, at least for Endgame, close to beating the Avatar record for most money at the box office, of course, before adjusting for inflation. However, I think X-Men by far is the one that has the most potential because X-Men is so vast. You have so many different characters. You have some of the greatest villains of all time within this universe. You also just have so much diversity. Again, that thing that they love to try and push down people's throats. You wouldn't have to do that if you actually followed along and did and focused on some more X-Men oriented storylines. Now, it could be that they're trying to have that 5-year gap because they want to try and make people realize that when they do come out with an X-Men film, that it is going to be a brand new year, a brand new era of the X-Men franchise, and try and separate it from the older versions and the older films from the Fox era. But with all that being said, I really don't trust them to do that. If they're going to go ahead and sabotage this film by changing the ending and making it into a shorter film that doesn't make sense, that isn't well paced, then at the end of the day, I don't think that's a good move. And I think that it actually goes more so against Disney and the studio involvement of destroying a film before it even comes out. Even though it may have been bad in the first place, it still is really sad. So where did that leave? Where would that leave this film as far as the overall X-Men universe and all the different films within the X-Men franchise? And as you can see from this, Deadpool 2 have been some of the highest grossing worldwide films without any adjustment for inflation. You had Days of Future Past, which was an excellent film, did very well. Logan, which was excellent, did very well. Apocalypse, which made 543, and that's because, guess what? You had Days of Future Past come out before that, and that was excellent, so people thought, oh, Apocalypse is going to be really good too. Sure enough, it wasn't, and so people did not see it a second time. People did not have the legs of which they had for Days of Future Past, which they wanted to see over and over again and say, oh yeah, the word of mouth on this is very good. Apocalypse did not have that. Last Stand, of course, being the last of the original trilogy, which had X2 to kind of base itself on. Wolverine did okay for being a very different type of film, kind of in the in-between years of all of this stuff, was able to do well enough. X2 did well, of course, because the first X-Men was pretty damn good as well and also was great in its own right. X-Men Origins Wolverine was terrible, which is why it didn't do well. X-Men First Class being the reboot of all of this, though, started off low because people were saying, I still remember X-Men Origins Wolverine a couple years ago, and it wasn't very good, but X-Men First Class ended up being very good. In fact, it might be one of my favorites of the X-Men franchise, to be perfectly honest. So where does this going to lead? Where then is, Dark Phoenix going to end up on this? I would see that, X-Men Dark Phoenix is probably going to fall somewhere in that 6 to 8 slot, because I think that this film overall is just not going to be able to grasp that much money and grasp that much attention, especially now being under the Disney brand. Knowing that there's now this behind-the-scenes chaos with changing the ending of the scene, with Sophia Turner coming out and trying to say that she might not ever work in Georgia or any state that is against any type of any type of state that supports heartbeat legislation for abortion. I think that her getting involved in this at this time, right before the movie that she is kind of the star of in a lot of ways, is a very bad move on her part, because a lot of people that go to see these movies are Christians, and the last thing that you want to do is piss them off and say, all right, fine, well then I'm not going to go see it. This very well could be one of the lowest grossing X-Men film in history, but also one of the lowest rated ones as well. And I think that regardless of the Disney takeover or not, it was already going in that direction, especially if it was going to be anything like Apocalypse, which the first trailers seem to indicate, though we really won't know until it comes out this Thursday. So guys, what are y'all's thoughts? Are you excited for X-Men Dark Phoenix? Are you going to go see it? Do you think that the X-Men universe is going to be ruined by this franchise? And do you think that Disney is doing a wise thing by putting at least a 5-year gap in between this and the next X-Men film? And do you think that they're trying to sabotage the ending of this film to not really do that well because they want to try and come back and say, look, we've now taken over and what you remember is going to be completely changed and we're going to listen and it's going to be great? And of course, all empty promises, because that's all that Disney can do lately. I would love to hear your thoughts about this and any of the other X-Men films. Also, what's your favorite X-Men film? What do you think is the best X-Men film that has been made thus far? And also, of course, as I said first, what are your thoughts about Dark Phoenix? Do you want to see it? Do you think it's going to do well at the box office? Based on these early projections from Disney themselves, it doesn't seem like they have much confidence in it. And based on those trailers, I don't have much confidence in it either. So I'd love to hear all your thoughts in the comments below. Guys, if you like this video, smash the like button. Give me a subscribe. It helps me out a lot. You are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless.